Welcome to a TBN special report, Revolution in Iran. I'm Erick Stakelbeck, and over the next 30 minutes, you'll hear the inside story of one of the most important developments happening in the world right now, one you may not have heard much about. Over the past few months, tens of thousands of Iranians have taken to the streets in cities across that country, demanding an end to the Iranian regime and freedom for the Iranian people. After living under the tyrannical rule of Iran's Ayatollahs for decades, many Iranians have had enough. The trigger for these ongoing demonstrations was the death of a 22-year-old Iranian woman who lost her life after being arrested by the regime. Iran's leaders have responded by brutally cracking down on the protesters, killing hundreds, if not thousands, and imprisoning many more. Yet the protests continue, and the regime is facing perhaps its most precarious moment since another Iranian revolution brought it to power in 1979 amid chants of death to America and death to Israel. But today is a new day. Could we see regime change in Iran? What is the situation on the ground there right now? How would new leadership in Iran impact the Iranian people, the region, and the world? And what about the Iranian Church, which is the world's fastest growing? We'll answer all those questions and more, but up first, we're joined by Reza Safa, an Iranian native and founder of TBN's Nejat TV, which broadcasts the gospel in the Farsi language into Iran, a place where Christians face severe persecution. Reza, thanks so much for joining us. Hey, these current protests, they're ongoing. But the roots of this discontent among the Iranian people goes back years, really since practically the founding of this so-called Islamic Republic in 1979. Tell us how this has been festering and why this latest round of demonstrations may be different than the previous ones.
First off, thank you, Eric, for doing this program and showing the heart of the Iranian people, that they're fighting for their freedom. There are many things that factor in this, what's happening today. This brave movement started from Mahsa Amini and then spread all over the country. You're talking about economic deterioration, oppression, police brutality of Basiji group and local police. This government has kind of reigned over the every aspect of the society. They're telling people what to wear, where to go, how to eat. And of course, the main thing, I think the root of this is the oppression economically, because they have eliminated the middle class, and you have either extremely wealthy people or extremely poor people. The majority of the people that were middle class have lost that deterioration of their currency now. In my time, right before revolution, you would buy $1 for 7 toman of their currency. Today is 35,000 of their currency to $1. So you can see just last year alone, the inflation was at 59%. So people are desperate today in every aspect of that society, and they want to change.
You've got great contacts throughout Iran on the ground. What are some of the things you're hearing about the protest and this crackdown by the Iranian regime?
Because they have closed down the internet, and so majority of the news doesn't get out. But because we have so many believers in Iran, I just heard about a boy who got arrested during the demonstration, was taken to a prison, and after a week he was released. And 5 days after he was released, he killed himself. Apparently, they raped him in prison, and that's a humongous thing for an Iranian man to be raped. And of course, they rape many women according to the Islamic law. Before they execute a woman, that woman cannot be a virgin. And so we hear a lot of very, very tough stories like that is coming out of Iran. You hear out here that they're saying about 400 plus people have been killed, but we get the number over 15,000 people have been killed, thousands of people being arrested. And now the parliament of Iran passed the law to execute some of these demonstrators. And so again, this is tyrannical regime, brutal to its own people, for the sole purpose of expanding Islam all over the Middle East, their version of Islam.
The crackdown has been relentless, Reza, as you just laid out, but the protesters, hey, they've also been relentless, and they're not leaving. They're still out there in city after city despite this brutal crackdown. Would you like to see the U.S.? I mean, you mentioned we haven't heard much about this story. That's why we're doing this special here on TBN. Would you like to see more attention paid to this pivotal story, not only by the mainstream so-called media, but the U.S. government?
You know, you would think that we have a big stake in a change of regime in Iran. I would think 50% of the Middle East problems with the sponsorship of terrorism throughout all that region would stop if this regime would fall. And you would think that Biden's administration would be more interested in supporting. You know, when that Green movement began, President Obama did not support it due to the fact that they didn't know what the outcome would be. And he admitted that that was wrong. That was a wrong movement. And today you would think that President Biden would get behind this and would take steps that cause this demonstration will cause a change of regime. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah, you know, this seems like a moment similar to the 1980s, Reza, during the height of the Cold War when President Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." He got behind those anti-Soviet dissidents. It seems that we need that today, a movement getting behind the Iranian people. Hey, you mentioned Iranian believers. Another great untold story, I believe, is the growth of the church in Iran. Yes, Iran. You're at the forefront of that with your great work at TBN Nejat TV. You'll be back with us a bit later in the show to talk about that. Reza, we'll see you soon. Up first, more on the Iranian protest, the new Iranian Revolution. This new Iranian Revolution was sparked back in September when a 22-year-old Iranian woman named Mahsa Amini was arrested by the Iranian regime's so-called morality police for supposedly wearing her hijab, or Islamic head covering, in an improper fashion. She died while in custody, and many believe she was murdered by the regime. Her name has become a rallying cry for Iranians everywhere. Joining us now is Editor-in-Chief of the Foreign Desk top Middle East expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, great to have you with us. You've been doing such incredible work documenting these protests at the Foreign Desk. And one of the real defining characteristics has been the role of women, Iranian women, rising against their oppressors here, the Ayatollahs in Iran. Lisa, talk about that a bit, the role that women have played in these ongoing demonstrations.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for giving this important story some well-deserved airtime to talk about the people's movement in Iran. Of course, the catalyst of this most recent round of protests being the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, a beautiful girl who was taken into custody by the so-called morality police in Iran just for showing a little bit of hair in front of her hijab, not wearing her Islamic headscarf properly, taken into custody, beaten. She slipped into a coma and died only days after. And of course, that became the catalyst. And a lot of women, of course, coming to the streets and saying, we don't want to wear the hijab, we want our freedoms, but they are also supported and accompanied by the men in that country. So even though the catalyst of this most recent movement was women and women's rights, on the face of this most recent movement are women, it is turned into a call for regime change, an all-out revolution for change, for freedom, for human rights. And this time around, Eric, there's never been this much unity, both inside Iran and outside Iran, and such clarity in the message. We want this regime gone. We want freedom. We want basic human rights.
Yeah, Lisa, you have incredible contacts on the ground inside Iran. You've been documenting every day at the Foreign Desk. Tell us some of the things you're hearing. Number one, about the regime's crackdown, how brutal it has been. And secondly, do the people on the street in Iran believe that there is a real chance here for regime change?
Yeah, Eric, if there was ever that belief, that true hope for regime change, this is it. We've been doing this for years, and you and I have worked together on so many of these human rights abuses. I know you've been particularly, highlighting the Christian persecution in that country, which has been horrific over decades. 43 years, the Iranian people have endured these horrific, brutal crackdowns, now more than ever on the streets of Iran. And I'll tell you some of the differences because people ask, why is this movement different from other movements? And how will this one be the one that ultimately topples the regime? Well, we're seeing it in provinces all across Iran. It's not just contained to these major cities. In 2009, we saw the Green Revolution in Iran, and that was one of the other more high profile movements that we saw over the last 43 years. In that one, we saw more of the Tehran kids, the cool kids, right, coming out, showing us they wear gel in their hair, they love designer clothing, and guess what? They want to start a revolution. This time around, we're seeing it even in cities like Qom, a clerical city where the madrasas and the mosques are. We're seeing it all throughout the country. We're seeing it among all ages, all socioeconomic brackets, and a lot of those young people are being killed. And the reason why this may just be their revolution is because there's no going back. When you watch your 16-year-old friend, your 22-year-old friend get shot and killed just for peacefully protesting on the streets, how can you ever go back? How can you live with this regime that has never wanted the best for its people, when it can go into its top university, Sharif University, which is like the MIT or Harvard of Iran, and kill, point blank, shoot at the best and brightest minds, the future of that country, those who will become engineers and researchers and doctors in that country. The regime is so easily killing them and cracking down on them and beating them, arresting them. And, because of that, we believe that the Iranian people are truly going to come out day after day until they get what they want.
Yes, since this regime came to power in 1979, Lisa, it has oppressed its own people. It's called for death to America. It's devoted itself to the destruction of Israel. All that said, what would regime change mean for the people of Iran, first and foremost, but for the region and for the world?
Right. Imagine a world in which the number one state sponsor of terror, who is putting billions of dollars into terrorism in Yemen and Iraq and Lebanon and Gaza, all throughout the world, and supporting suicide bombings, would not exist. Imagine a world in which all those Iranian people who are freedom-loving people would join the Abraham Accords. They can join the future of peace and prosperity in the Middle East because they have that potential, because they're showing us that potential. The Iranian people are very clear in telling us it's not that they're against Islam, for example, or against anything. They want to live freely. They want all religions to live side by side, all ethnicities to live side by side. They want to have an Iran in which they have a chance at living with modernity if they choose to do so, where women have equal rights to men. Right now in Iran, in the court of law, women have half the value or the rights of men. I mean, it's crazy to think that in the year 2022, when we have so many high-ranking and women with such high potential in that country being treated as half the value of their male counterparts. So, this story obviously needs the high profile that you're giving it, Eric, and it needs us to all share these stories and do whatever we can to raise awareness about their fight, because that's all that we can do right now to help them.
Yeah, Lisa, last question. You have a family heritage in Iran. You live here in the States now, of course, but the people of Iran are still near and dear to your heart, I know. What can the United States, in particular the current administration, the Biden administration, what can they do to support the Iranian people right now?
Right. It's probably the most important question, because the Iranian people know that they can't go at it alone. In 1979, they had, Carter's supported Shah being toppled, which was obviously a mistake. Historically, we look at the evolution of the region because of that move. And we know that right now we need that support from the White House. When President Obama comes out and said, I made a mistake by not supporting the Green Revolution of 2009, as he has in recent weeks, well, we hope that the Biden administration is listening closely. The first step would be to completely pivot away from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. We cannot negotiate with terrorists. We cannot. There's no deal to be had to begin with. And now when the Iranian people are telling us, step away from this myopic belief that there are two options when it comes to Iran, bomb them or let them get the bomb. And now the third option, the Iranian people are telling us, is them to support this grassroots movement so that they can have a future, they can be free. The Iranian people are telling us that that is what they want for their future. If that's what's best for the United States and for the allies and for a secure and safe Middle East, then there's no reason not to be on the right side of history in this case.
Well, Lisa, we know that you are on the right side of history, no doubt, with your great work at the Foreign Desk in support of the Iranian people, doing great work documenting what's going on the ground there right now. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us. Keep up the great work. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.
The Iranian regime not only threatens its own people, its drive for nuclear weapons also threatens America and the very existence of Israel, a nation which Iran's leaders have vowed to wipe off the map. Incoming Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to never allow that to happen. And the man who served as his top advisor, Israel's former ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, has warned of the consequences of a nuclear Iran.
You have the people of Iran that aren't burning the American flags. They're burning pictures and tearing down pictures of Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They're burning the pictures of the Ayatollah. And instead of getting support from the outside world is ignoring them. This is a moment where we can peacefully resolve the nuclear problem of Iran. Because look, we do nothing and Iran gets nuclear weapons. It is a catastrophe. If we stop it, we're going to have to launch an action in order to prevent that. Now, that will come with a heavy price. We might have to pay that price because the danger of a nuclear Iran that calls and works for Israel's destruction is so great that we may have to do it. But there is one way where we can really peacefully resolve this, which is if the Iranian regime collapses from within. And that moment is there right now. The spark has been lit. The fire is spreading throughout Iran. Now, what they need is oxygen. They need the outside world, the free world, to support the Iranian people's desire to be free, to pump as much oxygen as possible into that. And we could have a situation like we had 30 years ago with the collapse of the Soviet Union, a game-changing event that would help the Middle East in so many different ways and help us also advance peace in the region.
Well, we know that the Iranian regime is cracking down on protesters at home, but is it ready to lash out abroad as well? We're joined now by Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C., and an expert on all things Iran. Behnam, look, we've got more and more reports from U.S., British, Canadian officials even saying they are concerned about Iranian regime activity on Western soil, even assassination plots in our backyard. What do you think the Iranian regime's next move is here in the West as these protests rage at home?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and you're very wise to draw the linkage between domestic and foreign policy, particularly given the fact that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is the engine of domestic repression inside the Islamic Republic, also happens to be the engine of foreign aggression outside the Islamic Republic. This is the group that has a long arm that has reached onto European soil, American soil, Western soil, and has engaged in attempted assassination, terrorism, and other kidnapping attempts over the past few years, has stepped those attempts up over the past few years, and is likely going to continue this pattern of aggression. Right now, the regime is actually riding a high in terms of its foreign and security policy. It feels unstoppable. It's launched ballistic missiles 3 times now at northern Iraq, at Iraqi Kurdistan. It's proliferated drones, not just in countries in the Middle East, but particularly now to Putin in Russia, who is using them against Ukrainian civilians and critical infrastructure there. So the regime feels like it is not going to be stopped. And so I would not be surprised if any of the threats that U.S., U.K., Canadian, and other political, security, and intelligence officials have been warning about, if 1 or 2 of them end up coming to fruition. Now, the good news is that some of the plots have been foiled or thwarted or intercepted in the past, but what you've seen from this regime is continuity and the law of numbers, and God forbid that one of these plots actually land.
Yeah, sadly, this regime has earned its status as the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, Behnam, and it's really stunning. They are beset by problems at home, obviously with the demonstrations ongoing, yet they are still finding plenty of time and resources to devote to terror around the world. That includes Hamas, Hezbollah. It also includes their nuclear program. Behnam, do you believe, in the wake of the protest and what you just mentioned, Iran's growing relationship with Russia, another pariah state, do you believe that the Iranian nuclear deal, which the West has been so desperate to revive, could it finally be off the table now, or could we see it revived soon?
Ultimately, the proof is going to be in the pudding on this. If you ask me, even by 2015 standards, knowing what we knew about the Iranian nuclear program then and the fatally flawed deal called the JCPOA, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action then, I think agreeing to that accord then even was a strategic mistake, a political mistake, and a moral mistake. But layering on what we know now about Iran's formerly concealed atomic archives that the Israelis seized and exposed to the international community, that the regime now has been violating not just that agreement, but the additional protocol and its safeguards agreement, and much more important pillars of the global non-proliferation regime. That as of November 2021, the Europeans, who are no hawks on Iran's nuclear program, have been warning not just America, but the whole world, that the counter-proliferation benefits of the deal are being eroded by Iran's nuclear advances, that the things the regime has been doing as it relates to enrichment to 60% purity, phasing in more advanced centrifuges, which spin uranium at faster rates and greater output, and the production of uranium metal, which the regime has no immediate civilian need for, and in fact is used ultimately, could be used ultimately for the core of a nuclear device in the future. These things are irreversible in terms of the knowledge the regime has gained. So a deal that was fatally flawed by 2015 standards should absolutely be off the table by 2022 standards, knowing what we know now. So it's a political mistake, it's a philosophical mistake, but it leads to strategic mistakes like being obsessed with this zombie agreement, this fatally flawed nuclear deal.
I like that zombie agreement. That's a good way to put it, Behnam. Hey, last question. Iran and its proxies have essentially surrounded Israel with a ring of fire. I mean, like you said, drones, missiles, rockets. If there is regime change, if these demonstrations are ultimately successful, we see the Mullah regime exit out of Iran. How much of a game changer is that for the region and even for Iran-Israel relations? It could be a new day.
Oh, it absolutely could be a new day. It could be a restorative day when one looks at the history of Iran-Israel relations in the 20th century, for instance. So if there is a fundamentally new regime in Tehran, there will be a fundamentally new foreign and security policy. Because one thing after 43 years is quite clear, that the Islamic Republic is a poor guardian of the Iranian national interest. And that Iran actually, if you look at it objectively and through the lens of history, has much more in common with Israel and the West than maybe appears to the eyes of some of Iran's Islamic leaders today. So there would be much more opportunity for collaboration than conflict in the future if there is that potential change of regime. But that big question then again is if, followed by when and how.
Yeah, we shall see. The Iranian people are ready for change. That much is clear. Behnam, thanks so much for following this, and thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Amid all the darkness of the Iranian regime, the light continues to shine inside Iran. The protests and cries for freedom are growing, and so is the Iranian Church, against all odds and despite horrific persecution. Well, they say that you can't stop the gospel. That includes even inside Iran. The world's fastest growing church right now resides inside the nation of Iran against all odds. Reza Safa is back, founder of Najat TV. Reza, I believe in no small part, your work at TBN's Najat TV has helped to bring those numbers to such growth in Iran, numbers for Christ. But hey, you've seen this coming for a while. You wrote about this in your book. Tell us more about what you see for the future of Iran and the future for the church there.
In 2003, Dr. Crouch realized that something special is happening in Iran, because at that time we started broadcasting a few hours a week, and before we know it, we had hundreds of calls from Iranians, Muslims, used to be radical Muslims, that called our office to accept Christ. And since that time, we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands of Iranians have come to Christ. So there's a tremendous move of God. The Bible speaks about this in Jeremiah chapter 49. predicts what's happening actually in Iran. And then it says at the end of that chapter that God will establish his throne in that country. And thankfully, we are broadcasting 24/7. Thank to God for TBN is making this possible for us to broadcast in the Farsi language for millions of people to hear the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. And of course, God hears the cries of the oppressed people, praying for a leadership that will, the next leadership will take this people to places where God desires for this nation and for the church of God to be established and protected during this whole process.
Yeah, and Reza, we know when that does happen, you will be there with TBN Nejat TV. Reza Safa, thank you so much for your great work for the kingdom,
Love
for the people of Iran. God bless you, my friend. We will see you again soon. Iran is not only one of the most pivotal nations in the Middle East today, it was once home to the mighty Persian Empire. This is a Bible land where the stories of Esther and Mordecai and King Cyrus unfolded. The current rulers of Iran have attempted to trample upon that proud history, oppressing their own people and shaking a defiant fist at the world. Could their harsh rule finally be nearing an end? And will the Iranian people's struggle for freedom prevail? We may find out very soon. Thanks for watching, and God bless.